Já temos a comissária. Começar. Welcome to the press conference of the informal video conference of EBSCO ministers. This was co-chaired by Minister of Labour, Solidarity and Social Security and Minister of State for the Presidency of the Council of Ministers. So I would give the floor to Minister Mendes Godinho, Minister for Labour, please.
Good afternoon, muito boa tarde.
Good afternoon. Well, today we met at the informal EBSCO Council, civil society ministers and the commissioners who were present at our meeting today as well. Basically, we looked at the importance of the emergency measures and the responses given by all member states, their reaction to the crisis situation in order to retain jobs, to protect employment in these very difficult and demanding times. And then we also noted the fact that there were certain vulnerable situations which have been exacerbated by COVID. We need to strengthen the European social model, and we also saw that we need to have an action plan for the European social pillar which is ambitious, with ambitious targets and objectives, quantitative targets. We have to have something which is measurable, and these will require indicators in terms of employment, qualifications and combating poverty. And these, of course, will be the objectives which we'll use as a basis for promoting a recovery based on social resilience. And the social pillar will be the basis of our recovery. And we have also talked about the digital and green transition.
To Minister of State Mariana Vieira da Silva, please.
Muito boa tarde. Durante esta tarde reuni.
Good afternoon. We met to discuss gender equality, and during the afternoon we discussed to say that in many countries there is a different impact on men and women of this crisis, and this difference can, if not changed, can give rise to falling back in terms of participation in the labour market, namely for women. This afternoon we acknowledge the importance of the action plan to implement the social rights pillar and to have an action plan which would take into consideration the gender perspective and to give special attention to that same perspective. We concluded that we need a structural approach based on integration of gender in every employment policy, social protection, equality, to have a definition of goals and objectives which may open the path for all member states. Also, we highlighted the importance of including this gender dimension in the recovery and resilience programs so as to include everyone, women and men, in this recovery. Gender structural inequalities were made worse by the crisis and need a special intervention, namely in household tasks and opportunities for employment, where women are left out of some areas. So work done remotely must not become an additional burden on women in terms of inequality. So member states contributed for an informed dialogue to see how gender equality relates with the pillar of social rights and how we can.
Commissioner for Equality, Commissioner Helena Dalli, please.
Thank you. I thank you. I thank the Portuguese presidency for today's meeting, focusing on gender equality at the heart of the EU recovery. So we need gender equality to build a stronger and fairer Europe. A year ago, I presented the EU gender equality strategy for the coming 5 years. And of course, at that time, we were unaware at how crucial our strategy would be in the context of the pandemic. Later this year, we will propose rules to combat and prevent gender-based violence. We recently launched the public consultation, which is open until the 10th of May. The vision of the EU gender equality strategy is one of a Europe where all women and men, girls and boys, in all their diversity, can thrive, lead and be free. We will shortly be delivering on one of the key initiatives of the strategy, the pay transparency proposal. And as we know, the gender pay gap in the EU is 14% and has changed little in the last decade. It is obviously not right that women and men still do not receive equal pay for the same work or for work of equal value. Transparency regarding pay will allow workers to detect pay discrimination and claim their rights. It will uncover unconscious gender bias in pay structures at company level. It will also help pave the way to change employers' mindset comes to pay transparency. Only by bringing such bias to light can action be taken. This, together with the implementation of the Work-Life Balance Directive, will help us in addressing the gender pay gap. The gendered impact of the pandemic calls for gender-sensitive responses. The EU launched policy tools and financial instruments for a gender-equal recovery. The upcoming action plan to implement the European Pillar of Social Rights, the European Social Fund Plus, and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. In the recovery efforts, we must pay particular attention in keeping and bringing women into the labour market, be it through gender-sensitive policies, programmes and accompanying funds. The gaps are still too high, as we all know. The funding of care systems must be a priority when it comes to recovery measures. We must also address labour market segregation. Tackling horizontal segregation should entail measures to attract more women into fields dominated by men, for instance, STEM and ICT, as we have been hearing, as well as efforts to attract more men into female-dominated fields, such as care and education. Vertical gender segregation is equally important and must be addressed if gender equality is to be promoted. Women continue to be underrepresented at decision-making positions at all levels. So to address such challenges, we will launch an awareness-raising campaign to tackle gender stereotypes. Together, we can turn this unprecedented challenge to gender equality into an opportunity for a more gender-equal Europe. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Let me just inform all of you that Commissioner Nicolas Schmit was supposed to be participating in this press conference as well, but he had to leave because he's attending the Interparliamentary Committee meeting organized by the European Parliament and the parliamentary dimension of the Portuguese Presidency. Having said that, we can start with our questions and answers. We have very limited time, and we'll start with a question from the room. RTP, please. And the mic.
Good afternoon. Ricardo Cruz, RTP. Dear Minister, you said that one of the ideas to fight poverty in post-COVID, that there are some ideas. Have you thought of some measures? And you also said that we want a European minimum wage to guarantee a dignified livelihood. Is there an amount that you have in mind? And how do you set an amount, bearing in mind the different realities of each country? Thank you.
Em primeiro lugar, em relação à necessidade
The need to check. Well, we know that poverty is something that we have to deal with at the European level. The Pillar of European Social Rights states a number of principles to make sure that we fight this on a European level. We have to then translate that into a number of measures. Domestically, in Portugal, we've set up a committee with a social society to make sure that we know what the measures are to fight poverty and social exclusion. This includes measures, namely family income, access to qualifications and education, vocational training as a crucial element to allow that people can access to equal opportunities and that you can follow your school curriculum to the end and they have a full career in terms of education. That's also an important instrument in terms of fighting child poverty. So a whole plethora of measures can apply here. We will have some addressing special groups which were identified in a clearer way during the pandemic. The main concern, which was discussed here during the EBSCO Council, was to move from social rights to a specific action plan in 3 key areas. 1, employment. That's one of the main areas. We have objectives in terms of employment for Europe, which will then be translated into objectives for each of the member states. Number 2, qualifications. This is crucial to achieve equal opportunities. And also as a crucial factor in this digital as well as in environmental transition, to make sure that this social basis is used as an element for this recovery. It is the basis of this recovery. We also need to have goals in terms of fighting poverty set at the European level. As you know, the objective had been set for 2020, and in Portugal was to have 200,000 people left or out of the risk of poverty and exclusion. All indicators seem to show that we have taken 700,000 people out of this risk group in terms of exclusion and poverty. But we have to move faster in terms of our priorities, bearing in mind our difficult context. And COVID, as we know, will make many situations worse for people, both at the European and domestic level. So we have to have some measures for income protection.
Yes, of course, we have been hearing all day today on how we must step up our work in this area of policy, not least because of this, what happened this year. So we must use the tools which the which the Commission offers, so that we can improve the lot of our citizens, especially those who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and the pandemic has exposed inequalities even more. And all of us who have been in the field and listening to our citizens and to the plight of their citizens, whether it's about employment, poverty, all that has afflicted our societies, not only this year, but always, but it has been compounded during this year's pandemic. So we are more than ever. We must be ambitious in our programs, and we must use our tools so that we will be able to deliver for the good of our citizens.
Thank you, Commissioner. And now may I just remind all journalists present in the Zoom platform that you should raise your hand if you want to pose a question. For the time being, we know that we have a question from the Portuguese news agency Lusa by video conference as well. Lusa? Se não há ninguém da Lusa, pergunto.
Well, if there's no one from Lusa, I would like to know whether there are any other questions on the Zoom platform. Well, if there are no other Zoom questions, yes, I would like to put a question. I can't raise my hand. Please tell us your name and your media.
O meu nome é Maria Caetano, sou jornalista da publicação Minerva.
Sim, sim, força.
Yes, you can go ahead. I would like to put two questions. One is on social rights. The Minister was talking about certain measures and targets. I would like to know how they're going to be linked to the recovery plans. And if these objectives are going to have an impact on the amounts which are actually going to be disbursed to countries. And I would like to put a question to the Commissioner for Equality, perhaps in English. Yes, perhaps in English that's better, says the speaker.
Okay. I would also like to ask a question in regards to the coming proposal on pay transparency. I would like to, I would like to ask this: how far will this proposal go in terms of demanding effective transparency? Who will have access to the information and how? This is my question.
Peço muita desculpa, mas eu vou-lhe pedir.
I must apologize, but I would like to ask you to repeat the question addressed to the Commissioner, because I don't think the Commissioner was able to hear that, nor did we, nor can the interpreters hear. The quality is extremely bad, unfortunately.
So I'll just repeat my question. In regards to the coming pay transparency proposal, I would like to ask how far will the Commission go in terms of making the pay differences actually transparent, meaning who will be able to have the information on pay differences and how?
Em relação à primeira pergunta que foi colocada,
Well, in relation to your first question and targets, well, what we discussed at the informal EBSCO today was member states' own assessment and the importance of having Europe-wide targets so that we have certain commitments in terms of priorities in the field of employment and social affairs. It's a way of having indicators which will enable us to assess the situation, have concrete targets on employment, qualifications and combating poverty, as has been said. Now, you were putting a question about links with the recovery and resilience plans. Well, as you know, these plans are under approval and negotiation, so these targets are not linked to the recovery and resilience plans. The targets are actually linked to the action plan for the European social pillar, which is moving towards a conclusion phase in the Commission and which will be presented by the Commission on the 3rd of March. So we heard from Member States today, and they were assessing the importance of quantifiable targets, which will also be instruments which will allow us to keep an eye on the social dimension in Europe, how far we've got, and also stressing the social dimension as a factor for recovery. So that's what member states were discussing today, and they were saying that we've had targets for the 2020 agenda in the past. We set targets in the past, and we would like to have something similar now when it comes to the action plan under the European social pillar, so that we can have this social commitment about how we should move forward in the social side, or on the social side in Europe.
A propósito das medidas de transparência salarial.
On wage transparency measures, what I wanted to say is that on a number of occasions the Council has already looked at the need to close the wage gap and the pensions gap. We talked about that and we're working on that, because when we look at the impact of COVID, there's been a drop in employment, a drop in the number of hours worked by women, and that means it's not only going to lead to a present and future wage gap, but also a future decrease in pensions. This is something the Commission is looking at, and the Portuguese government, the Presidency, at this juncture can only say that it can support the Commission wholeheartedly in this file. And on the agenda, we talk about launching negotiations as soon as the text is adopted, and you can count on the Presidency in this area too.
Please.
Yes, thank you. As we all know, the Pay Transparency Directive was one of the political guidelines of President von der Leyen. We have been working on it since the beginning of this Commission. We have consulted, I believe, very strongly in social dialogue, and we had a lot of consultation so that we come out with the right balance for this proposal. I cannot go into details at this stage, but I can promise you that this is an ambitious proposal and a proposal which will work. It's a good tool so that we address discrimination when it comes to pay salaries which women and men get. Of course, this is not permitted by the treaty. So we will be that there is no discrimination when it comes to pay. And I'm really relying also on the Portuguese presidency to help push this proposal forward once it comes into force, which should be on the 4th of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. E agora sim temos condições para...
Now we may ask Lusa to ask its question. Sofia Branco. Good afternoon. I have two questions. One for the Employment Minister, which is as follows. Could you give us a clue as to the measurables in terms of measures that you're going to propose in order to keep jobs? Then a question to the Commissioner.
We had a recent interview with Minister Mariana Vieira da Silva, and she confessed that gender equality is a difficult topic to gather consensus among the member states. How far are we to really get this consensus on the fact that the pandemic had a different impact on women and men? Thank you.
Senhora Ministra.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you. My reply would be to say that today's meeting actually showed a large consensus amongst member states to acknowledge that the impact of this crisis has been very different for men and for women. So, because the impact was different, we have to react with public policy so as to not go back, not to backtrack in terms of the improvement that we've had over the past few years. So today, I believe that we all acknowledge that the impact is different for men and for women. Thank you.
Em relação à questão dos objetivos, o plano de ação...
In terms of objectives, the action plan will be submitted by the Commission on the 3rd of March. That's the schedule that we were given. And in that plan, the Commission will include goals by choosing which goals it will include. The EPSCO Council, what we discussed with social partners, with civil society, and with member states was to check how member states assess the fact that there are objective goals set in areas which are considered crucial in the post-COVID scenario. And in that scenario, we must make employment an even bigger priority after the difficult months that we have lived, and member states are trying to find mechanisms to support jobs and qualifications. must be supported as well as a key component for the recovery. And we also want to fight poverty and provide an answer to this difficult situation, namely for families and households. So this is a structural pillar of the social model of Europe for the future.
Commissioner Dalli, would you like to add something?
We didn't quite get the question here from our end, but I think it was about how do we know that women were more impacted by the pandemic. And apart from ourselves being in the virtual field, by speaking to people concerned, speaking to civil society, speaking to parliamentarians who are in contact with our citizens, we've also had various studies, research going on by EIGE and also by FRA. And many issues were pointed out to us with regards to this disproportionate way in which women have been affected by the pandemic. So we also have data which we continue gathering, which is showing us this, but also from our experiences in the field of how people were and still are experiencing the pandemic. And that is why we are saying all the time that the recovery has to have this gender focus as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, both ministers. This is the end of our press conference.